Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Madeline or Ross, are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep, yep, we can hear you, Scott.
I'm having a little bit of technical trouble this morning, but we'll work through it. Okay, I think I can hear you now.
Hello.
Great. Looks like we've got 24 attendees on the call. I apologize, I changed this over to a webinar format at the last moment, and it caused some issues. We'll give it just a minute or two to see if anyone else joins.
It says for us unable to start video because the host has stopped it. So will Ross be able to share his screen and you be able to see Ross?
Yeah, I think so. Let me try to.
And we can't see you either.
Okay, I think it's because we're in webinar format.
Scott, I can try, if it's okay with you, sharing my screen and pulling the PowerPoint up and see if that works.
Yeah, go ahead and see if you can get your screen up.
Looks like host disabled participant screen sharing is the error message I get.
All right, I might have to either make you the host or open that up. Hold on 1 minute. Ross, I tried making you the host. See if that works.
Yep, looks like that works. Are folks seeing my screen now?
I can see your screen.
Yep, we can see it. Perfect.
Awesome.
And also Ross and Madeline, just so you're aware, because I set this up as a webinar, all of the participants should be automatically muted until we get to that point where we're ready to start the Q&A.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead and get started? It's 10 after. I apologize to everyone for some of the technical delays. My name is Scott Adair, and I am the Director of Economic Development for the County of Humboldt, and I appreciate all of your participation today. Today, we're going to be discussing the Humboldt County Cannabis Marketing Assessment, which was commissioned by the county and completed by Humboldt County Growers Alliance. After this brief welcome, I'm going to turn it over to HCGA for a bit of an introduction to themselves and their organization and a little bit of background and history on the creation of the assessment. And then we'll do a review of Project Trellis in general before we get into the actual detailed review of the assessment. And when we do that, HCGA, they have a presentation which you should be able to see on your screen that they'll be sharing with all of us. We'll also open it up for Q&A toward the end of the call to take your questions. I do want to specify, unlike the initial town hall meeting that we had, which was a little more loosely structured, today we're going to ask that participants limit their comments to 3 minutes and that participants not make repeat comments until other participants have had an opportunity to participate and to share their questions. Also, we do have a Q&A feature or function built into the presentation, and you can enter those questions directly into that Q&A feature on Zoom, and then we can answer those as we move along and when we get to the Q&A portion. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ross and Natalie to introduce themselves and introduce their organization and give a little bit of background before we go to the Project Trellis overview. So Ross?
Morning, everyone. Thanks for waking up bright and early on a Friday. My name is Ross Gordon. I'm Policy Director with Humboldt County Growers Alliance. HCGA is a trade association in Humboldt County whose members are Humboldt County cannabis businesses. We currently have about 275 plant touching licensed members who are cannabis businesses in Humboldt County. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance Humboldt County's world-renowned cannabis industry. And we do that by carrying out activities, including advocacy, education, and public relations. That includes bringing together the supply chain and B2B events, as well as an advocacy and government affairs program based in Sacramento. So that's the brief overview of who we are and what we do. Natalie, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that.
No, that was great. Thank you, Ross.
Okay, good. Thank you for that introduction. So a little bit about Project Trellis before we get into the actual presentation for the marketing assessment. Project Trellis was a program that was created by Humboldt County. It's a local government initiated and funded program to provide support services and other ancillary resources to Humboldt's cannabis businesses and cannabis business community. The reason why Project Trellis came about was simply because we, as economic development practitioners, identified and recognized that our cannabis businesses in our community did not have the same level of support and resources that were available to other businesses, because many of those other resources and support mechanisms or vehicles are funded federally. And as we all know, there's an issue with federal dollars and federal programs and not being able to provide support or resources or services to the cannabis business community using federal dollars. So we recognized that what was needed was a more localized solution, and the Project Trellis program was created using Measure S funding, which comes from the cultivators in our cannabis community. And an allocation of that Measure S funding has been set aside to support three structures within the Project Trellis program, three components of the program, if you will.
Scott, we've lost audio for you.
For this was to, I see some individuals are saying that they've lost audio. Do you have audio now? Okay, perfect. So prior to the commissioning of the marketing assessment, the county had been engaged through an RFP process in collecting bids and proposals from other companies, local companies and non-local companies, to provide their own proposed ideas for marketing and branding Humboldt's cannabis industry. But it became clear as we went through that process of reviewing those proposals and working with vendors and contractors who submitted those proposals, and then also working with our ad hoc committee, which was created to review and rank those proposals, it became clear that we were missing a bit of a baseline or a foundation to compare all of the proposals against, and that we really were lacking a uniform data set, if you will, that we could apply to each of the ideas that were brought to the county for marketing and branding. So we paused the process and we went back to a model that worked well for the county's equity program, which was to commission a study, an assessment, and then use that assessment along with community feedback and input to inform and guide what the actual program and process needed to be. And when we approached the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, that's just what we asked them to do. Give us a set of data and values and put together a factual history that we can then take and use to apply to all of these proposals and ideas that have been brought into the community or into the county regarding marketing and branding Humboldt's cannabis brand. So that's that's trying to squeeze a year's worth of effort into just a couple minutes of an overview. I'm certain that there are perhaps more questions with regards to that process and where we're at and what the future holds, what the new process will be moving forward. But we'll get to that after the presentation. For now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to HCGA. They'll walk us through this PowerPoint presentation. We've set aside approximately between 20 to 30 minutes to go over this material, and then we can get into the question and answer format of our discussion today. So with that, Ross, are you ready?
Thanks, Scott. So today was hoping to, like Tuesday, give a little bit of a presentation or overview of the marketing assessment, but did want to consider the fact I'm just looking at who's in the chat here right now and who's on this call. It looks like it's about maybe half to 60% or maybe more folks who are also on the Tuesday call. So I want to try to be respectful of your time and not go over exactly the same information that we went over on Tuesday, and maybe approach the same issues from a little bit of a different perspective. Also keeping in mind that I know some of you on this call, it looks like we're not here on Tuesday's call. And so want to make sure to provide an overview that will really go through the content of the assessment and not assume that people are already familiar with it. I do want to say again, if for folks who have not yet had time to read the assessment or who would like additional information in addition to this presentation, the full assessment is both available online, and there's also about an hour-and-a-half long presentation available on Humboldt County Growers Alliance's YouTube page. If you search for Humboldt County Growers Alliance, we only have a couple of videos up there, and one of them is a more detailed presentation on this marketing assessment. I would encourage folks to take the time to check that out if they're interested in more information. So really the goal for today's presentation is to go into a little bit more detail about the different regions that we looked at as part of this marketing assessment, those being Bordeaux wine, Napa Valley wine, Kona coffee, and Colombian coffee, and talk in a little bit more detail about what goes on in each of those regions to create a regional brand identity and a regional marketing initiative. On Tuesday's call, we talked a little more in the abstract about what these regions share in common, but didn't really go into that detail for each region. So I hope that more detail on each region will be helpful. I'll also say a lot of the conversations I've had personally about this marketing assessment and also conversations that I think happened on Tuesday's call, a lot of them seem to be focused around the idea of being interested in these different case studies, but really wondering and asking what specifically does this look like in Humboldt County? What are the nuts and bolts of what, for example, an equitable decision-making structure that places farmers at the center and places the industry at the center of marketing decisions. Like, what materially does that look like in Humboldt County? And I do want to say and make clear that, I might have opinions about that, and those opinions are changing all the time as I have conversations with more folks and think about it more. But really the goal of this assessment is not necessarily like my opinion about the answer to that question or HCGA's opinion about the answer to that question, but to provide information for us to have a conversation about answering that question over the coming months and years. And one real finding of this marketing assessment is that regional marketing efforts are communal and collective efforts that evolve over the course of many years and even decades and generations, and that these are questions about how to structure this and how to make decisions and what kind of marketing to pursue that are really collective decisions that will be made over a long time. So I hope this presentation provides useful information for grounding and providing a framework for those conversations. But I do just want to be clear, the goal of what we're doing here in this assessment is not to answer those questions or say exactly what a Humboldt County collective marketing program should look like. So to jump into it, and maybe to cut to the core of our conceptual approach in this assessment, what we really looked at is a global framework for regional marketing initiatives that's known as geographical indications. And this is an approach for regionally grounded craft agricultural products that are essentially tied to a place, a people, and a culture. And it's a way and approach adopted on a global level that tries to protect that collective heritage and differentiate those products from commodity products. And so it's a strategy that's pursued all around the world to prevent consolidation, commoditization, and corporatization of craft regional agricultural products. And we chose this approach for a number of reasons. It's not just a short-term strategy trying to boost short-term profits. It's really a holistic strategy for long-term sustainable rural economic development. It is built on the idea of equitable participation by all of the affected stakeholders, the ability to have collective decision-making control over what a marketing campaign looks like. I know a major concern for many people for many years in Humboldt County has been the idea that someone would take the Humboldt County story from Humboldt County. And geographical indications are an approach that really emphasizes having the type of participation that keeps both that story and that storytelling, but also the value from the product, keeps that here with producers and with the industry here in Humboldt and doesn't outsource that elsewhere. It's also a broader approach that really thinks about sustainability, which can include questions of environmental sustainability, as well as economic sustainability for the industry, and really allows a public conversation about what that looks like. And then lastly, I think it's important to emphasize that these structures work. They don't always work, but if you look at examples like Colombian coffee, like Bordeaux, like Napa Valley, regions that have been able to successfully deploy these strategies and have done them well have been able to differentiate themselves as craft products that are valued by consumers. And so we want to look at successful examples of that and not just look at examples of failure and see what is it from those regions that we can do. So in the remaining time here, just want to jump a little bit into each of these regions that we studied and talk about maybe two sides of things that I think are relevant to some of the questions that people have been asking about this assessment. And that's on one hand, what is sort of the organizational structure that's guiding each of these regions? How do each of these regions structure their marketing initiatives? And then on the other hand, what kind of marketing programs are they engaging in? And I think there's a connection between those two concepts. The structure of the marketing initiative is closely tied to the specific marketing programs that are implemented. The organization that's doing the marketing has to have the capacity to do the programs. And so there's kind of this inherent relationship that I hope will kind of get clarified a little bit in the course of going through these different case studies. So starting with Napa Valley, closest to home, and I think the case study that tends to most strike people is one that is worth looking at. Wine production in Napa Valley goes back to the late 1800s, went through many different crises, including prohibition, including diseases which destroyed wine crops, including a lot of fighting between, on one hand, wine producers and wine distributors over who controlled marketing and branding for Napa Valley produced wine. And all of this kind of culminated in 1944 with the founding of the Napa Valley Vintners Association, which represents today about 550 winemakers based in Napa Valley. And Napa Valley Vintners has really been responsible for promoting Napa Valley wine and making a lot of the collective marketing and other types of decisions that have made Napa into a successful region today. One of the most important aspects of that is pushing to establish an appellation system for Napa wine. And appellations are something which is not a common approach in the United States. The idea of regional and collective marketing versus private companies with a large amount of private control tends to be not an American idea. It tends to be a European idea. In Europe, there are appellation structures and origin-based regional structures for a whole range of products. In the United States, wine is really the only product that there's a formal structure to have that for, except for now we have a state level structure for cannabis. And Napa Valley Vintners was really instrumental in lobbying Congress to make that happen and for creating that structure. And over time, Napa now has 16 sub-appellations within Napa Valley that have been incorporated. Those sub-appellations have independent organizational structures and work collectively with Napa Valley Vintners and the county as a whole, as well as other organizations in the county, which we'll talk about more in a moment, to collectively market and promote Napa Valley cannabis. One thing that I think is important to think about with this is how policy relates to this. So obviously there's a policy element to establishing an appellations program at the federal level. But then in addition to that, in the 90s and through the 2000s, Napa Valley Vintners were advocating for other laws to strengthen this regional marketing framework. So for example, they lobbied for California state laws that require that if you label wine with the Napa name, at least 85% of grapes have to be grown in Napa. So keeping that value within Napa. They've also lobbied for state laws that require conjunctive labeling, which means that if you are a sub-appellation, you're also required to use the Napa name on your bottle. And what that means is that when appellations are marketing themselves, they're also marketing the county at the same time, and it sort of increases the amount of cooperation between those two levels of marketing. Some of the critical Napa Valley Vintners marketing efforts, we've talked about this on the last presentation, but turning the market into a marketing tool is a really core finding of this assessment, and trying to find resource efficient ways to market these regional industries. Direct to consumer advertising is something that some regions do, but oftentimes it can be extremely resource intensive. And the combination of taking the normal marketing, the normal like business to business marketing that an industry does, and also turning it at that same time into a press event and a public relations event and an opportunity to talk about high quality regional products is a way to really kill two birds with one stone and be really efficient with those marketing resources. And so these wine auctions in which people are coming from all over the country and all over the world to buy the finest Napa Valley wines, and then at the same time turning that into a press event is one thing, and Bordeaux does this as well, that Napa really relies on as a cornerstone of its marketing efforts. In addition to that, building partnerships is a really big element of what Napa Valley Vintners do. So they'll do a lot of, for example, 3-day immersion programs and trips for wine industry professionals or members of the press, and take them to farms and really show them around Napa Valley and create a real connection in the minds of those important people about what makes Napa Valley special. And you can imagine something similar in Humboldt County, either with press or even maybe with bud tenders, or, you know, there's lots of directions it can go, creating that sort of personal connection. And then Napa Valley has, in general, been very good with content marketing, with public relations, and with really integrating all of these things together in their marketing efforts. The last thing I think is important to say about Napa Valley is obviously they've been really, really successful with tourism. And the Napa Valley Vintners have a close partnership with a separate organization, Visit Napa Valley, which is really the organization that stewards and manages the tourism industry in Napa Valley. And that's a $2 billion industry that provides 16,000 jobs in Napa. It's integrated with a whole range of things, with vineyard and winery tours and on-site sales, some of which we can do in cannabis, some of which we can't, or at least we can't yet, but are possible things which could exist in the future. There's a lot to say about this, but in the interest of time, I'll just say this cooperation between the tourism sector and the industry itself is a really major portion of what makes Napa Valley special and successful. Maybe one more idea, this pairing of wine and food. So the idea of pairing wine with other things that people like, right? There's a lot of marketing that happens, for example, to restaurants. And we see this in Bordeaux also, the idea of sort of expanding the group of people who are marketing your product. So it's not just your region that's marketing your product, but you form an alliance with, for example, restaurants, and now you both have a collective interest in marketing that regional product. So looking at Bordeaux is sort of another example of a wine producing region. There are many ways that Bordeaux is different from Napa and many ways that it's similar. One way that it's different is that it's much bigger. So there's about, I think, 600 to 800 Napa winemakers right now. There's about 7,000 winemakers based in Bordeaux. And of course, it's also a very old region that has a long history of developing these organizational structures and these marketing programs. And so it has sort of a gravitas and like a weight to it that it takes a long time to develop. But I think their organizational structure is really helpful to look at, which is kind of a multi-tiered one. And this is one we see also in Colombia and in other regions. So kind of at the center of the Bordeaux marketing structure is the CIVB. And this is an association that represents the entire Bordeaux wine industry, both distributors and farmers. Its primary missions are marketing, collection and dissemination of economic data, and collection and dissemination of agricultural research and technical information. And the CIVB is sort of the overarching organization which is managing these marketing efforts. That said, it's connected to other important stakeholders. It's connected on one hand to the syndicats. So in Bordeaux, which is about the size of Humboldt County, Bordeaux itself is an appellation. And then within Bordeaux, there are 57 sub-appellations that are the different regions of Bordeaux. And I'll just show quickly on the next slide. And kind of what this looks like. Here are a bunch of the sub-regions that are in Bordeaux. And the syndicats are 35 organizations that manage those 57 appellations, which are composed exclusively of farmers. And there's a relationship between the CIVB on one hand that manages the whole county and those 35 regional organizations on the other, where each of them are taking on certain projects which make the most sense for the situation that they're in. So the syndicats will do things like they'll do quality control within their appellation or their region. They'll make collective decisions on things like what would they like their town center to look like? You know, do they want to open, for example, a collective wine store with wine from that appellation within their town center? And then the CIVB might do, direct-to-consumer advertising based on the region as a whole. They might be collecting and disseminating information about the different subregions. And there's that cooperative relationship. And then in addition to that, you also have, in this case, the French government, which is very supportive of appellations, with the INAO providing support as well to sort of tie all of this together. And this kind of three-legged stool between the government, a region-wide association, and the local associations is a really common framework that we see in these geographical limitations. Skip forward a little bit. Like Napa, industry-facing marketing is really at the core of what Bordeaux does. In recent years, just in the past decade, they've started to develop resources to do more direct-to-consumer advertising. But generally, Bordeaux has been a little bit of a closed region. Its prestige and its insularity have kind of gone hand in hand. And the partnership, particularly between winemakers and distributors in Bordeaux, which is a long, long history, has been a big part of promoting Bordeaux wine to the world. And like Napa Valley, these sort of wine auctions, they're called en primeur sales in Bordeaux, in which wine is sold ahead of time and used to generate press coverage, is a major way that Bordeaux is able to market its wines. In addition to that, here are some of the major marketing programs that different Bordeaux regions, as well as Bordeaux as a whole, will pursue. Ideas like wine festivals, schools, and museums. Oftentimes, these are based in the wine-producing regions themselves and are integrated with tourism. CIVB will hold events in major wine markets, going all around the world and bringing Bordeaux wine to some of the highest consumption places in the world. Wine retailers that are run by appellations are a really amazing way to both feature those wines and also sell those wines. Tourism and chateau visits are increasing. And then there's also been an increasing amount of direct-to-consumer advertising through the CIVB just in recent years. So Colombian coffee is a really interesting comparison to Bordeaux because I think they have a lot of similarities. Both of these are larger regions. Colombia is the biggest region that we looked at. There are over 500,000 coffee growers who are based in Colombia. It is a project of the Colombian federal government to protect and promote those farmers. It is a major policy priority of Colombia as a whole to do this. So in that sense, it's a little bit different that this is so important to the success of an entire country that they really put an enormous amount of resources into their program. And of course, that means in some ways it's not the best comparison for Humboldt because we're never going to have that type of resource. But it's also a really interesting comparison in the sense that if you did have those resources, what sort of things would you want to do? So at the center of the organization of Colombia is the NFC, which was a trade association founded in 1927 to represent those over 500,000 coffee growers. And it almost functions like a quasi-governmental entity because this is so critical to Colombia. The leadership is elected by coffee farmers in a multi-tiered structure. There's a partnership with 38 coffee cooperatives, which are spread throughout the region. So similar to the way that Napa Valley has a partnership between the region as a whole and its 16 sub-appellations, and the way Bordeaux has a partnership between the CIVB and the region as a whole and 57 sub-appellations. Colombia also has this partnership with 38 coffee cooperatives that sort of provides the ability for a fully stakeholder managed process. The NFC does a lot of things which are more typical of governments sometimes. They'll purchase coffee directly at minimum prices from farmers. They run their own processing and distribution. They even reinvest in rural infrastructure. They also have a close partnership with the government. The government will put a tax on coffee. That tax is then reinvested back into marketing programs for the region as a whole. So it's sort of a familiar model in that sense. The government also works to set favorable trade rules and do IP production and set export rules for Colombian coffee. Colombia also has minimum quality standards for its coffee, which I think is something which is interesting to consider and is a commonality among many of these different regions. By setting minimum quality standards, they're able to ensure that coffee sold under the Colombian brand is going to be something that consumers want and consumers feel good about, and that there's not subpar products out there that ultimately harm the quality of the brand. And in the assessment, we say this is maybe something over the long term to think about for Humboldt. It would obviously be a very intensive stakeholder-driven process that there would need to be a high degree of consensus on, but we do float it as just an idea for a long-term project that could be helpful. Some of the major marketing activities for Colombia, partnerships with major distributors and retailers. So as we sort of mentioned on the previous slide, Colombia really tries to protect independent farmers by owning their own collective processing and distribution, and purchasing coffee at a minimum price, and trying to prevent what we see in a lot of other agricultural sectors, which is centralized processing, distribution, export, having a lot of control over farmers. So they do try to hedge against that, but the reality is that the coffee market as it exists does have these consolidated distributors and retailers. And so one thing that Colombia does a lot of is try to form partnerships with those distributors and retailers to ensure that Colombian coffee has a market. Colombia also does operate a pretty major direct-to-consumer advertising campaign, largely because they are a region that has more resources. Juan Valdez is the representative of that advertising campaign. He was selected over an intensive years-long process, which is discussed more in the marketing assessment, to try to have a farmer-driven process to select an image that would represent who the Colombian coffee farmer is. And that became the face of Colombian coffee and is sort of the core of their marketing campaign. And then in addition to having advertising and commercials based on Juan Valdez and the Juan Valdez brand, the country also opens retail outlets that are branded Juan Valdez throughout North America. And that's a way for them to essentially vertically integrate the region as a whole. The last thing I'll say just briefly is that Colombia has pursued a differentiation strategy for its coffees, which I think certainly has relevance to think about in Humboldt. One differentiation they have is what's called coffee of origin, which are essentially appellations that are being developed in Colombia. This is a relatively new project, but there is one major appellation, Nariño, which currently exists. They're looking into sustainable coffees with private environmental certifications. They partnered with the Rainforest Alliance to try to encourage farmers to adopt more environmentally sustainable methods and then market that to consumers. And then preparation coffees, which are unique types of coffees, which are maybe comparable to different cultivars in a cannabis context, trying to differentiate, special types of Colombian coffees by emphasizing things like Tea Berry or Supremo coffee. So the last place we looked at is Kona coffee, which is based on the Big Island of Hawaii. And Kona is a little bit of a different perspective for a number of reasons than the previous 3 regions that we looked at. There are different reasons for that. One reason is that Kona is just a bit smaller and a bit less well-resourced than some of the other regions. I would say it is not as intricately organized as the other regions. Its history is a little bit more reactive than the other regions. That said, they have had success in a lot of ways, and they are recognized and viewed as a craft coffee, largely in terms of their ability to cooperate with the resources around them to launch a marketing campaign that is sort of allied with other surrounding interests, which we'll talk about more. So the history of Kona coffee, I think, is useful, which is that this is a region that has very, very high labor costs. Because it's based in the United States in particular, its labor costs are very high, especially as they came to compete in the 60s and 70s with regions in South America and in Central America. Also considering that Kona coffee farms are very small compared to other coffee producing regions. These are really small craft farms. And there was historically a question about, can Kona coffee even survive the high labor costs and commodity coffee market, particularly in the 60s and 70s when the idea of craft or specialty coffee was not so widespread. And the solution that Kona coffee farmers pursued, and there's actually a particular person named Takeshi Kudo who led a lot of these efforts, was to form coffee cooperatives and try to have collective ownership over processing and distribution, and in that way work together to pool resources and overcome some of those barriers that Kona faced. And after organizing coffee cooperatives in Kona, Takeshi Kudo was then actually elected to the Hawaii state legislature, where he was able to use that position in government to continue to forward some of those ideas. So one thing that he did was create grading standards through the Hawaii legislature. And so now the Hawaii Department of Agriculture manages a lot of the grading and assessment of Hawaiian coffee. And really the Hawaiian Department of Agriculture is now heavily involved in every aspect of promoting Kona coffee. Another thing that Kudo and Kona did was create a partnership with Superior Coffee and Tea, which was an Illinois-based coffee distributor, and recognizing that Kona's own marketing resources were very limited, partnering with this larger distributor gave them a way to get their product out to market. Now, this is an approach that has a lot of drawbacks, obviously, that you're now reliant on a single distributor. But Kona's approach, partially because they were so short on resources, ultimately was to partner with a distributor that could promote their product to try to get access to those resources. More recently, and this is trying to create more of an independent brand for Kona that's separated from these larger distributors, they've really tried to integrate with existing Hawaii tourism promotional efforts. So from what we found, there wasn't necessarily like a big Kona marketing campaign or direct-to-consumer advertising campaign, or what there is really is Hawaii already does a bunch of tourism promotion. There's already a bunch of tourists in Hawaii, and one thing the tourists kind of get told they can do when they're in Hawaii is they can go visit coffee farms in Kona, and they can go buy Kona coffee at grocery stores or at coffee shops, and they can have that experience and they can form that connection. And so it's an example of how, by cooperating with those larger resources, Kona coffee farmers have been able to be successful despite facing a lot of different challenges. So that's just an overview of each of those regions. Coming back to thinking about sort of what draws these regions together, or the assessment as a whole. This slide here is really the focus of the presentation on Tuesday, and really thinking about what are the commonalities which these regions all hold in common. Strong organizational and institutional structures and equitable participation as ideas which kind of go together. All of these regions, kind of with the exception of Kona, have 100-year institutions, or at least many multi-decade, multi-generational institutions, which are really managing these marketing efforts. And they really have these intricate structures for ensuring that there's equitable participation and input by the affected stakeholders, meaning the farmers or the producers, or in some cases, the industry as a whole. I really like what one commenter said on Tuesday, and think it really cuts to the core of what we found in this assessment, which is making sure that participation is not just on day one, and that participation is not just in the creation of a marketing effort, but that the entire project of marketing over the course of many years, many decades, many generations continues to be driven by equitable participation by the industry itself. There are also other aspects of this: effective legal and IP protection, which is not something emphasized today, but something which is very important to protect the name of a region and make sure that it's not watered down or used fraudulently. Strong market partnerships, which I think many of these regions speak to, whether that partnership is with distributors or retailers or even the press, or maybe restaurants in the case of wine. Finding other strong market partners to help carry your marketing message is really essential to these regions being able to market efficiently and in a resource efficient way. And then some of these other ideas like grading and quality control, collective data collection, promotion of environmental sustainability, and public policy expertise. Hopefully some of these regions give a sense of how each of those sort of integrated ideas can be a big part of a marketing program. And one big message and finding we have in this marketing assessment is that the more a marketing effort can really be holistic and it can really be integrated with the range of considerations that are important to the industry, the more effective that marketing effort will be. So just to end with some key takeaways, and this is the same slide that we ended on last time. Geographical indications, which is the strategy pursued by all four of these regions considered. They're a holistic strategy for sustainable rural economic development. They're not based just on short-term sales. They're based on a long-term vision for promoting the industry, although they also do short-term sales. And really thinking about what's best for the region and the community. How can that region and community resist corporatization and commoditization and build a craft agricultural product that returns value to producers? Strong organizational structures with equitable decision-making are really central to that. Finding integrated ways to market, not just advertising. Advertising can be one piece of it, but finding ways to have strong market partners, differentiate product, do public relations, protect IP, all of those are really essential. Something we talked about less today, but is important, is that a Humboldt cannabis marketing program can both sell within the existing market, but also define and influence the trajectory of the future market. Because we have such a new cannabis market, there are a lot of opportunities for the promotion of, for example, terpene profiles or sun-grown cannabis or things which may not be as obvious to consumers right now today. But because we have this collective marketing effort and because the county has made what I think is an amazing step forward to provide these collective marketing resources in perpetuity, we have a chance to really think about how do we want to define and influence the market and not just react to what currently exists. And then a common finding in this assessment is that all of these regions are finding ways to come together and to work together and cooperate and expand that circle of people who benefit and expand the resources that they're able to put into marketing, whether that's by making sure that the industry is really at the forefront and at the table as stakeholders, whether that's about partnership with other sectors of the community like tourism, or whether that's about partnership with other parts of the industry outside of the region or partnership with places like restaurants. Finding ways to work together is really at the core of making sure that marketing is successful and benefits the region as a whole. So appreciate everyone's time. Looking forward to hearing folks' questions and comments.
All right. Perfect. Thank you, Ross. Appreciate that. Before we get over into the Q&A, I want to address a few things. And also, Ross, I believe in order for me to access the Q&A, you need to make me the host.
How do I do that?
If you click on me, if you go to the participants and click on me, there should be an option to make me the host of the meeting. Got it. I see it now. I'm the host now. Perfect. I do want to just add a little to the conversation. As Ross was presenting, I did post a link to the Project Trellis page at our new website for economic development, which is gohumco.com. And that link is in the chat box. If you want to just get more specific information about Project Trellis or the various programs, you can click on that link and it will take you to an overview, as well as an online archive of documents related to the program. I also posted in the chat box a link to a YouTube recording of an HCGA presentation for the marketing assessment. And that YouTube recording is available for you to watch online. It's a much more comprehensive review of the presentation that you just received. I think it's close to an hour and a half long. But you're welcome to grab that link in the chat box and watch that YouTube video if you're interested. I have received inquiries about receiving a copy of the recording from the first town hall meeting. We're also recording this town hall meeting. Initially, we thought that the recording didn't take because we were not able to find a shareable link on Zoom. But it looks like what happened is it shared the recording, or it saved the recording as an audio file on the county's server. And that audio file is huge. It's over 300 megabytes. So we're working with staff and with our IT team to figure out how we can get that uploaded to the Go Humco page. And as soon as we are able to get that uploaded, we'll notify the community and let the public, the general public, know that those recordings are available online. Hopefully with today's recording, it will save it as a shareable link. It looks like it's just a feature on Zoom. You can choose to save it as a link or save it actually as a hard audio file. And if we have a shareable link after today, we'll send that out and share that with everyone. And if you don't see that appear on Go Humco or you have other questions, you can email us directly, our team at gohumco@co.humboldt.ca.us. So what we're going to go ahead and do for the, not for the remainder of the meeting, but for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and accept, we're going to open up the Q&A. And then we will, after the Q&A, talk a little bit more about the feedback and comment form online and what the community input and feedback process is. And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap up at the end. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature at the bottom taskbar on Zoom if you want to plug in your question, or we can go ahead and open it up for actual participation. And so I'm going to see, and you'll have to bear with me, I apologize. I'm not a Zoom expert. I'm going to see if I can open it up here. If you can raise your, try raising your hand. There's a feature that allows you to raise your hand. I should be able to open it up for you to comment. And I'm going to, let's see. I don't see any raised hands yet. Oh, now I see a raised hand. Perfect. Looks like Kristen would like to talk. So Kristen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you here again. If you could keep your comment to about 3 minutes. And then we're going to allow others who have not commented to comment first before we go back and allow for repeat comments. So Kristen, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, hi. This is Kristen. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions. One is about the comparison to Colombian coffee and some of the other designation of origin products referenced in the presentation. And my question about the Colombian coffee component was really this, I have some concerns about this idea of, I think it was referenced that part of that model is purchasing coffee at a minimum dollar amount, and then they utilize the leader for the designation of origin, Juan Valdez, and that brand as the face of all Colombian coffee. And I'm a little concerned about that model in relationship to this because cannabis is such an adaptive plant. I think we're going to see vast amounts of regional differences, and then also hoping that there's going to be an opportunity to have regional involvement in this project development and in the marketing for Project Trellis. So let me form these into two questions. Can we get a little more information about how purchasing coffee at a minimum and then making one farm the face of all Colombian coffee could be beneficial to cannabis in Humboldt? And then second question, is there going to be an opportunity for us to realize regional storytelling and regional marketing through this program? So I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kristen. So why don't we, Ross, would you like to take the question concerning Columbia Coffee, and then I can talk a little bit about the regional involvement?
Sure, I'm actually happy to talk to both of those questions, Scott, if that's okay.
Go ahead. And if I feel like there's something else that I should add, I'll just add it to your response.
So thanks for the question, Kristen. I actually completely agree with you. I think it is not appropriate for a single distributor to purchase all coffee from Humboldt farmers. I also think it would be completely inappropriate and ridiculous to have a farm be the face of Humboldt County, or to hire an actor like Juan Valdez to represent all Humboldt County farms. The information on Columbia is just an example of one approach. I think probably to your question about regional involvement as well, I think the Napa approach and the Bordeaux approach are probably closer to what might make sense for Humboldt County. And to the question of regional involvement, particularly in Bordeaux, that close relationship between a countywide marketing effort on one hand, and then the regional sub-appellations and farmer organizations on the other, is something which seems to make a lot of sense. I would say, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I think the point of this is my opinion. It's to provide information and different types of examples about what the right way forward is. And so I don't, it's not to say that any one of these regions is the way forward, but I do think those are important considerations, and hope that we'll be taking bits and pieces of all of these, I think, right? So hope that answers your question.
And I'll add a little bit there. And with regards to regional collaboration and community participation, also amongst the stakeholders, the next steps in this process, once we have concluded gathering public input, is to use that feedback to inform a staff report with various recommendations that we will take to the Board of Supervisors, the County Board of Supervisors, for their review. And among some of the questions that will have to be addressed in that staff report, and that will be turned into recommendations for the board's deliberation and approval, or other direction as they so direct, will be just exactly, Kristen, what you had asked about, matters of how do we ensure that moving forward, there's regional participation and collaboration in the process. How do the cannabis stakeholders and how does the cannabis community have continued influence and involvement in the program? How is the program managed? How is it monitored? Those are all questions that will need to be addressed. And the deadline for public comment has been extended by another 2 weeks. It was going to end today after today's town hall meeting, but we've pushed it out another 2 weeks. If we feel at that time that we still need more time for public comment or feedback, we can push it out again. We want to be cognizant that the market's moving quickly, and so we want to respond quickly and move rapidly with our marketing efforts so that we're not left behind. But we're not afraid to pump the brakes a little bit as necessary to ensure that we're collecting all of the opinions of the community. And I can tell you right now that the tentative date to take some sort of a response or recommendation to the Board of Supervisors is November 10th. but it could be any of those subsequent board meetings, either on the 17th or the 24th. But this is something we certainly want to wrap up by the end of November for sure, so that we can start the new year with more of a concrete, tangible effort to move the marketing program forward. And I'll talk a little bit more later after the Q&A portion about the feedback process and how you can submit feedback and comments to our team. So I'm going to go ahead. I see that Melissa Sanderson has her hand up. So Melissa, go ahead with your question. Oh, and you may be muted. So once I open it up for you to talk, you're muted by default. So then you have to unmute.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm driving. I'm sorry. Okay. I tried to talk on Tuesday, but form this into kind of a question about it. When the RFP got put out, I looked at it and, I realized that this is a task that not one company can handle. This is really going to take a lot of our participation and involvement to make happen. So I'm just curious that in this assessment, I didn't see anywhere that really informed people what we already have in our possession that we can use as a massive value for Humboldt cannabis moving forward. So I love the great things that we have to tell, supervisors know that, we already have a great thing going and this is the direction that we want it to go. And I think that the assessment, the future of it looking forward, I think it's got a great start and I think you guys did a wonderful job. So that's my only question.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I'll add a little and then
yeah,
turn it over to Ross if he has anything else that he would like to share. So we have heard that comment before, so that's going to be part of the feedback that we're going to use to inform our report to the board, which is perhaps we need to do a little bit more analysis on existing marketing resources and assets. This document, the assessment, is what we consider to be a living document. It will change, it will update, and it will grow. We expect it to. Our equity assessment has already been revised twice, and we're still trying to roll out the equity program. We haven't even opened up the application period yet for the equity program because we've modified the equity assessment a few times. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we need to make some changes or improvements to this assessment, if we need to include things like existing resources and assets. But I am sensitive to what I'm hearing and what you're saying, which is, hey, don't forget, we've got some marketing resources and assets here that already exist in the community. And perhaps rather than it just being awarded to one big organization, this might need to be a collaborative effort. And that's going to be part of the feedback that we take back to the board, as well as the proposal or recommendations for managing and supervising this effort. I think that this effort is larger than just any one particular staff member or individual or even county department. I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration. What that's going to look like, though, so that we have broad support across the industry and involvement, but also not to a degree where it slows down the process so much that we don't get anything done. Because for sometimes, for some people, committee is a 4-letter word. You can sometimes, get caught up in analysis paralysis and just talk about things, but not take action. So we're going to have to find a balance there as a community. How do we make sure we have sufficient participation and involvement from all the stakeholders who they feel like they're part of the process, they're guiding the process, they're informing the process, but that we're also moving the program forward. Ross, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Sure. Really appreciate that comment and question, and totally agree. There's, I think no way to move forward on this without involving all of the resources that we have here in the community. And there's a lot of marketing efforts right now that are doing really amazing jobs all over the county. And I think what this assessment is trying to do is, considering that although we have all those amazing marketing efforts, what we don't have or don't have yet is a single integrated countywide marketing effort, which is funded with substantial resources through MeasureS. And so what we're trying to look at here, and I think the question we're trying to answer is, how do we approach or vision that type of countywide marketing effort? But I completely agree with you that part of executing that and part of actually implementing that is taking some of those ideas and then asking what resources do we have here in Humboldt County to be able to execute that successfully.
I've got a hand raised by Rio Anderson. Rio, you're free to unmute and participate.
Thank you. Good day. Great presentation, you guys. I'm familiar with the Columbia model a little bit, and that's super fascinating. And it's also backed by a lot of infrastructure, like the Colombian government's involved, and there's regional warehousing down there, and they have international buyer programs. And so my question is in the assessment, and I guess transferring that model to Humboldt's going to be definitely different because it's a smaller region, and we have our own cultural challenges here of individualism and bringing people into a fold that people aren't used to. But in Colombia, the warehousing and they keep those commodity prices high by getting those small batches to market in the most efficient manner possible. So my question is will the assessment address kind of a collective infrastructure investment that's required to, and it doesn't have to, I guess it could be participation by private infrastructure warehousing and basically the distribution model seems like a challenge to us. And so how can we publicly invest in distribution models that keep the price low to get to market? So that's the question.
Thanks, Rio. Ross, do you have any response there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one thing that's useful about that question, Rio, to think about is like the fact that I think marketing, sometimes people think about just advertising, right? And really what we're talking about is like an integrated export strategy. And that means that all of these questions about like, how does distribution work when we're talking about like building a marketing strategy for an export product, like all of those are obviously really important as well. And I would agree with you, like we can't do the Colombian model, right? Like there's so many differences. It's like basically a fully integrated socialist model with the federal government in Colombia. So we're not going to do that. But to your question about, what would collective distribution or processing look like? One of the recommendations we make in the assessment is that the county consider because there's lots of considerations, using collective measure funds to support cooperatively owned processing and distribution so that as much as possible can stay in Humboldt County. And whether it's through that mechanism or it's farmers coming together over time or as appellations organize, folks being able to use that to leverage cooperatively owned processing, distribution, retail. All of those seem like potential paths forward, but agreed that distribution is really at the center of a lot of the considerations here. And how do you make sure that value is returned to farmers as we build this sort of like export industry?
Okay, Ross, thank you. We've got a request by Sequoia Hudson who would like to talk. Go ahead, Sequoia. You'll have to unmute. Sequoia, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, let me actually, I have, I tried to sign in on another device for the voice, but now I have two and it's feedbacking in my ear. Hold on.
Okay, no problem. You might have to mute the other device or turn the volume all the way down on the other.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, and there's no feedback.
Perfect. Yeah, so hi, my name is Sequoia Hudson, and I have a small farm out in southeastern Humboldt County near Mad River, Dinsmore. And I also have been pretty heavily involved in a company and with various organizations over the last several years, working really hard on unifying the community in the county and even the Emerald Triangle to really bring together as much as possible the really with like co-ops and the idea of co-opetition and how much we need to be unified and just supporting each other as a vast amount of operators in the area. And I feel that it's really important to have a county-wide marketing program that then also can have specific regional opportunities that would feed into that. But just to, to pull our resources together to have that bigger picture that then we can individually kind of do. I was a little, I didn't understand that one caller before Rio was saying about, all these individual resources that are already here, but then something about how we already have something that we need to move forward with that something. And I'm not familiar with even what that is. So I was curious if if you can answer that, or if that person can say what that is, because whatever it is, that if there's this one thing, I don't know what that is. So that was a specific thing, but then also just my point about the importance of the collaborative, collective marketing strategy. And I put these questions in the Q&A, and I don't know if you were still looking at that as well. That's why I raised my hand. But another specific reason why I feel like it's important to have the collective marketing and the collaborative one for the entire county is that I feel like there's also all the ancillary and non-cannabis businesses that are all over the county, whether it's in Willow Creek or Eureka or Arcata or Garberville, that could really be more impactful if they were all working together and driving, economic development for them individually, but also throughout the county. So like when, someone comes into Eureka and they're able to maybe go somewhere in Eureka, or whether it's a restaurant or a hotel or whatever, they can kind of look to see what's going on in the county or get some information on a specific farm, or there might be the various opportunities, whether it's visiting somewhere or just getting literature, or maybe it's a tasting that's happening at one of the dispensaries, and then maybe there's information. Like I just feel like it would be more impactful. It would really stretch out the bandwidth of the resources we have available to us if we could all collectively use it together. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Sequoia, I totally agree with all of that. I think that's very much in line with the findings of this assessment. I would also, I regret not pointing out earlier, this assessment does include 30 specific recommendations for what Humboldt County marketing could look like. And that includes a lot of these ideas about cooperation, about bringing together as many resources as possible. It includes recommendations about making sure that appellations are really a critical cornerstone, and the different regional organizing products are really a critical cornerstone of the countywide marketing effort. To your point about the relationship between regions and a countywide marketing program, there's also a recommendation that there's a lot of countywide marketing efforts right now that are oftentimes overseen or managed in different ways. And the idea of actually managing that under a single committee for oversight and review of those marketing efforts, to review how those efforts are working together. There are lots of different ways to approach that we recommend, but the general idea of working together in that way is absolutely the message of this assessment, and I totally agree with you.
Looks like, Ross, we have a few questions in the Q&A feature, and some of them also from Sequoia. So I'm going to go ahead and go through a couple of these. While you were putting together the assessment, did you come across any regions that tried a marketing program but failed? And if so, why did they fail?
So I can give maybe two examples of failure, at least to some extent. I think this is not covered in the assessment, but Tequila is an example of a region that has not done this very well. Tequila is a regionally based product based in northern Mexico. And however, from at least what the research I did on it, it seems that the value of the tequila brand has really been captured by a few distributors, and value is not returned to the farmers. And that's largely because the farmers are not involved really in the collective marketing strategy. And over time, it's become captured by those small number of distributors. And that's been a fear and a dynamic which drives all of these regions, and which all of these regions have attempted to guard against through making sure that stakeholders are at the table and you have a strong organizational structure which can manage these initiatives to make sure that the value is really distributed equitably. The other example, and this is maybe a little bit, is Kona. And Kona generally is a successful region. They are able to sell products at a really substantial premium. They get all this tourism, they're recognized. They've had a lot of trouble controlling their name though. And we talked about this a bit on Tuesday, where there is a law in Hawaii that says that if your product contains as little as 10% Kona coffee, you can label it a Kona coffee blend. So if it's 90% Central American coffee, 10% Kona coffee, that can now be labeled with the Kona name. And in that sense, I think we're really fortunate that in Humboldt and in California, we already have a set of state laws that require 100% of cannabis to be produced in the county in order to be labeled with the county name or within the names of the sub-appellations. And because Kona has failed to control their name in that way, there's a lot of fraudulent Kona product, there's a lot of subpar Kona product out there, and it makes it really hard for them to promote their region as a quality producing region. And I think the lesson from that is, again, going back to this conversation about integrating lots of different resources, which might not be the traditional like marketing as advertising idea. Some of those ideas about like IP protection of the Kona name, or the idea of a policy framework that can support having integrity in terms of the name of a region on products. All of those things really have to work together in order for a region to be successful.
Another question here, and I'll answer this one. Will the county marketing program be a collective marketing strategy, or is this something that is still being determined through this process? What we will do is take the feedback and input from the community and then pair that with the recommendations in the marketing assessment and take before the Board of Supervisors a number of different scenarios or potential paths that we could follow for moving the program forward. And it's also important to note that this is still part of a public process. And when we take the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, that will be done in a public meeting. And I would hope and encourage members of the cannabis community to come to that meeting or participate. Actually, it might likely be via Zoom. So to Zoom in or to call in and participate so that the board can hear specifically the feedback and the insight from the cannabis community and the stakeholders. There is another question here. Are the past submissions to the RFP allowed to be viewed before the assessment community feedback is closed? So not yet at this time, because yet to be determined will be whether or not we continue with the RFP process. The RFP process had been paused while staff went back and worked with HCGA and other administrators and officials to complete the marketing assessment. If the board decides we want to resume the RFP process or continue vetting some of the other proposals that have come in, then we'll want to protect those as part of the competitive nature of that process. And we wouldn't want to make them public until it's either determined that that competitive process is moving forward or the competitive process is going to be closed. And it could be that a new RFP is released or that there's a different recommendation altogether. So until we know for sure, we're protecting those proposals and just keeping them private because we're not sure yet at this point if it's going to remain part of a competitive process or not. Got a couple of other questions here. Let's see. So My only question is procedural. It sounds like Humboldt cannabis farmers in conjunction with the county need to work together to decide which facets of each of the 4 examples we want to take on and which facets we want to reject. Is that correct understanding of where we're at with this amazing marketing assessment? Ross, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I think this is a starting point for a community conversation about what we want this to look like, and the hope is that this will inform that. In addition to that, again, we just want to say, I wish I had more in the presentation. We do also have 30 specific recommendations for what things could look like. That part of this assessment, I would encourage folks to take a look at the assessment and those recommendations. They really follow, I think, logically from the discussion. There's nothing in there that's like super crazy or out there, at least in my opinion. But I think both looking at these case studies and then looking at those recommendations and having a community conversation about, is that the direction that this should go? I think it's the next step.
Another good question that came over, how is the county conducting outreach to farmers? I'm a little concerned that a significant number of Humboldt's farmers are overwhelmed by fire evacuation warnings and impacts. Is the county reaching out directly to permit holders? And I'll go ahead and answer that. We also shared that concern, which is why we pushed out the town hall meetings and then have also pushed out the public comment period. We've worked with on a variety of different mediums to try to reach out to the farmers via social media and press releases in the regular media. Also doing a few shows on KMUD, on KMUD's Cannabis show, having town hall meetings such as these. What we will be doing though, staff will, before we close the public comment period, we'll work with our cannabis services team at the Planning and Building Department. I believe they have email information for nearly all or most of the cultivators, and we'll push out another broadcast email to all of the permit holders. It is a challenge to try to reach everyone, even though we're posting it here and there and online and having meetings and going on the radio. And that's why we need all of your help. As you are the stakeholders in this process. And so it's important that you're talking to your neighbors, you're talking to your friends, you're talking to the other cultivators that you're running into at the coffee shop and asking them, did you see the cannabis marketing assessment? Have you weighed in? Have you provided your feedback or sent your input to the county? Because it's very important that we do that. I do want to go to another actual live comment. We've got a lot of Q&As coming into the Q&A box, but Craig with Alpenglow Farms has had his hand up here for a little while. So Craig, you're good now. You just need to unmute.
Good morning, Scott and Ross and cannabis community. How's my connection this morning?
Sounds great.
Excellent. First of all, I want to thank everyone for putting down their pruners and cutters and cleaning off their hands and getting on their laptops this morning. It's a busy time, and if you're not doing that, you're probably, taking care with some fire needs for some other communities. We appreciate everyone putting it down and getting some comment here. First of all, I'd like to say that I really am impressed with Ross's work with this assessment. It gave us a really good 30,000 square foot view, right? I personally have been to Columbia and have talked with the former Juan Valdez cooperative liaison and then a private commodity broker as well. And a lot of what Ross brought forward was spot on. But we have a lot of layers to this, and it's going to take a little time, and mistakes will be made. And that's part of a fledgling industry trying to do so many tasks at one time. We're trying to normalize. We've just legalized barely. We don't have banking and all these other things. So I think we all need to take a deep breath and really just move forward as fluidly as possible, knowing that questions will come up. And just like Scott said, we might have to pump the brakes a couple times. I really like that analogy. I do feel a one Humboldt message is possible for one component of this, but there will definitely need to be regional Appalachian breakdown, how monies get divided up, maybe by stakeholders in particular areas. I don't have those answers, but those are some of the thoughts going through my mind. I personally have been a beneficiary of a local marketing campaign, which did the 3 Ps, person, place, and plant, which really resonated with what Ross brought forward. And I feel that is a good first step. But like Rio Anderson mentioned, with the disconnect and distribution, not one of us is marketing one thing. And like these bigger organizations, or not organizations, but like the coffee and those other things, that was bulk product going out under one type of label. And that type of marketing is much easier than we're trying to do. We have, look, I'll just throw out some random numbers, 50 different jarred brands with the same 5 cultivars in those, which makes the consumer snowblind. And we're not even part of that program personally. And then you have the tourism, which is brakes are on at the moment, but I think the Canna tourism is a good focus to continue with, getting the folks to come to the area. But even with those components, not all farms can be open up for tourism, and not everyone has product on a shelf in Humboldt County. So there will need to be a lot of layers addressed, and marketing dollars provided by the county to be divvied up accordingly to that. I noticed one thing with the Project Trellis money and some of these equity funds, they were divided up. And that seems like a good way to address a lot of these concerns that the community might have. I'd like to see us working together as a community to move forward, but not lose regional stories. That's all for my comment this morning. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, I was muted there. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate your comments there. We have, this is a new process, and processes are often, refined. They go through several iterations of change. We've only, going back to the Project Trellis microgrant program, we've only concluded 1 microgrant round, and we're already making changes and improvements to the process and the application and the way that those applications are reviewed and scored and ranked. And that's because we received feedback and input directly from the community who participated in that process and who made suggestions for improvement. So you're right, we're gonna have to work together to move forward, to not be afraid or stuck in paralysis, if you will. If we wait for the perfect right program, we'll never get there. But I think if we work together and we try to remain inclusive, then we can trip along forward together, if you will, until we've got a really well-defined and efficient program. I do want to go ahead and turn it over also to, it looks like Carly would like to make a comment. Carly, go ahead. You'll have to unmute first.
Hi there, can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello and good morning. Thank you, Ross and HCGA, for all of your hard work on this project. And thank you, Scott, for launching this amazing Project Trellis program. As we know, the funding for this Project Trellis program comes primarily from the tax dollars that cultivators pay back towards the county. And I guess my question is, how will the county take into, with that background information, how will the county take into account opinions and suggestions of other stakeholders in the cannabis industry, such as manufacturers and distributors, who will additionally benefit from the marketing of the Humboldt County name, even though they are not, well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that is, that's also another comment that we have received concerning, there are stakeholders who benefit from this program,
who may or may not be the same stakeholders who are paying into the program. And Ross, do you want to, because I know you've answered that question numerous times before also, and it's covered in that question?
For sure. Yeah, it's something we talk about a decent bit, assessment that, of course, that's absolutely right, that the program is funded by Measure S cannabis taxes, and those cannabis taxes are only paid by farmers in unincorporated areas. And so what does that mean for a marketing campaign? Does that mean that distributors and manufacturers and retailers are going to be benefiting from a campaign that they're not paying into? And, there might be different ways to handle that. The recommendation that we make in the assessment is that the marketing program will probably be more effective if everyone finds a way to pay into it. And if there is a integrated marketing for the Humboldt County cannabis industry as a whole, understanding that the, significant majority of licensees in Humboldt County are farmers. And so farmers are always going to be at the base of that marketing initiative. But finding ways to make sure everyone is represented, and talking with particularly our advisors. There was one advisor, Cameron King, who's run the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, who helped prepare this report and provided comments on it. And he provided a comment I think was really helpful, which is that in his experience, telling the story of the whole supply chain and the whole region can be really powerful. And I think it's really powerful to tell the story of farmers and how does that interact with manufacturers, and how does that interact with retailers? The retailers in Humboldt County or on-site consumption in Humboldt County are all potentially a part of this type of experience. So it's something that needs to be worked out as an important question. And in this assessment, we do recommend and lean towards the notion that everybody should be contributing to this program and everybody should be included in this program.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and one other thing that I'll add, and it's a theme that has come up consistently, and also we've touched a bit on this call and other calls and other town hall meetings about it. We do need to have some level of stakeholder involvement and collaboration, and the community helping to drive the process and work together. But we can't have a divisive or split strategy either. When you look at the tobacco industry, for example, and their $600 billion budget cumulatively for marketing and promoting their products and positioning themselves in the marketplace, the amount of funding that we have for this marketing and branding program, although it can seem like a great deal amount of funding on one hand, it's really a drop in the bucket compared to what other regions are spending to leverage their brand and to position themselves in the marketplace. And so that just goes back to that balance that I referred to earlier, and I think a few others on this call, including participants, have brought it up, being that we've got to figure out a way to work together and have a strong collective uniform strategy, but still allow for the stakeholders and the payees, if you will, into that program to have some level of input and participation in the process. I do see a hand up from Thomas Mulder. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Thomas, you're good to go. You just need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, this is just a different Zoom format, so I'm a little confused with it. So just a couple of comments. I didn't jump in till about 40 minutes or whatever ago. I just wanted to piggyback on some things because people are saying about cannabis and other people benefiting from the cannabis tax monies. I think something to come to light, though, is there's other industries that market Humboldt for different reasons that actually can help get people here for tourism and other things. And I think that can, because people coming here, then there's going to be shops, and I think that can actually help the cannabis industry as well. I think overall we got to build the community in our county through multiple different industries, and I think we need to just take this piece with the cannabis realm and try to do as much as we can to help promote the overall health of our community. one big thing I heard Craig talking, and he sparked interest because it's about the tourism part or Canna tourism part. Is there any way to amend this marketing assessment to promote an ordinance change that would allow all cultivators to have Canna tourism? Because I think that's one big thing that's lacking with the ordinances we have before us right now. Is I think it would be amazing to be able to have people through, the right tour guides be able to bring someone out in like a small SUV or something like that, and people be able to see the cannabis being cultivated that they're going to eventually buy, or those kind of things. Or maybe even back in the old days, like people would come out and visit the farm, and then they would put a deposit down on their share of what they would want for their personal use and things like that. So I think if this marketing assessment was written, a couple little amendments, we could really promote change as far as in the ordinance and Canna tourism. I'm done. Thank you.
All right, Thomas, thank you for that. A couple more questions, or Ross, did you want to address Thomas's comments before I get to a few more Q&A questions that are in the Q&A feature?
Definitely, tourism is a part of this. Emphasizing this is sort of ultimately an export product, and that we're talking about sort of an export marketing strategy, and part of integrating with that is tourism. And tourism, this is a conversation I've been having with folks recently, like really tourism needs its own real, like a lot of thought about what that looks like. And I think in particular with you mentioned, Thomas, that question of who gets access to tourism is really a land use process. And that's the type of question we tried to stay away from in this assessment, thinking more about like what are the programmatic activities of a marketing program. But as a land use question, like totally, it's something that we consider.
I'm going to go ahead and pull up a couple of other questions from the Q&A feature. We may have more questions than we can answer in the time that is left to us, but I'll try to get to as many as I can if I feel like perhaps there's something in there that we haven't answered already. So this is a question, it looks like from Lindsay. Revisiting the question from Tuesday, if the RFP process was closed, how is the organization that is currently contracted, Southern Humboldt Business Visitors Bureau, given $75,000 annually? And so we had talked a bit about, we talked a little bit about this last Tuesday. The Southern Humboldt Visitors Bureau and a few other folks from Southern Humboldt actually came to a board meeting. It was a budget board meeting, and made a request of funding for a specific program that their organization was running, which also had a level of, there was a marketing strategy component to that. And that was a decision that the board made during that meeting to allocate some of those funds to the Southern Humboldt Business Visitors Bureau. It does not take away from or replace, however, the existing process for the use of marketing funds from the Project Trellis program to create a consistent and uniform marketing branding strategy. So they're two separate programs. One does not replace the other, and I'm happy to go into that maybe in a little bit more detail. However, the purpose of this call and the town hall meeting is to review the cannabis marketing assessment. So I'd like to stay a little bit more focused on the cannabis marketing assessment, but if there are questions about the board's practice of giving away funding to organizations for different initiatives, I would recommend that you reach out to me directly or reach out to our office, and happy to have a conversation with you about that. I've got a couple of comments here in the Q&A. Looks like not questions, but just comments.
Let's see here. There are a few questions related to storytelling and owning the stories and preserving the stories that make up the history and the culture of our cannabis community. Ross, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
I think the story and telling the story well is really connected to the idea of equitable participation, which I think is most of what we're talking about today, and making sure that the story is both told by the people whose story it is, and then that when that story is told, it's being told in a way that the value is being returned to those people themselves and is not being captured by some like external person who's trying to tell that story. So I think it just goes back to equitable participation and making sure that this is a marketing program that is run by farmers and by industry.
Perfect, thank you. There's a comment in here. I wonder what the one great thing is that the last speaker is speaking of. I think that was a response to a comment earlier about the fact that we do have some proposals already and where are we at with those proposals. We did answer that earlier in the call. I do see that I have another hand up as well. This one from Tristan. Tristan, go ahead.
Hi, Scott. I just want to say I'm happy we're having this conversation. And I just had a comment too. I kind of wanted to just also echo what was said earlier, that we were just in the infancy of the marketing and also legalization of Humboldt. And I just hope we don't start squabbling over where money is spent at this point. I think the county should be casting a large net and giving opportunity to many of the smaller regions in the county to tell their own story. I think naturally over time, things will consolidate. We'll start to see themes and overlaps. And around those, we can converge around like a central message that we can, promote to outside of Humboldt. I also think everyone needs to have patience and understanding that I think everyone wants the same goal for Humboldt. We want people to see like how beautiful this place is, tourism, promote the farms. I think we need to remember that we need to be united and not, united. And then also I just wanted to say that Southern Humboldt has been traditionally underfunded. It's hard to get our roads worked on. And so, I just wanted to say with the Southern Humboldt Bureau getting money, I think $225,000 is a drop in the bucket. And when they've had their, when they had their Feast of Fields, that's providing a lot of exposure to farmers that wouldn't otherwise be seen, or, when they're making their website. And it also, there's jobs in Southern Humboldt, the florists get paid, the caterers. So, I just wanted to say that, we should also be given a chance to spend money for Southern Humboldt. If you had one for all the beaches, say in Humboldt, they're so different. You can't just have one that says, visit the beach here. It's like you go to Southern Humboldt, our beaches are different from Trinidad. And so there's just a lot of unique things about Humboldt. And so I think we should be casting a large net and seeing like who really, is able to do something with this funding money. And, you might be surprised how many different cool stories and like, oh, I didn't know that organization was going to be able to pull that story. And, just give people a chance. This is seed money. So I just wanted to say, glad we're having this conversation. And I hope we can all, be good to each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate what you mentioned about unity. And I will, I'll add a little bit more context there. When the marketing component to Project Trellis was approved by the Board of Supervisors, this question already came up as we were going through our due diligence in creating Project Trellis regarding whether or not the funding should be split or divided. Or allocated to different communities or different parts of the region for their own separate marketing programs. And the board was very explicit that that's not what they wanted to have happen, and that they would not approve a program that had those types of recommendations. The board wants to see united effort and unity. We need to be inclusive and make sure that we've got a process that allows for participation, so that the payees and the beneficiaries of this program are part of the decision-making process, but that we're not splitting out the funding amongst the various payees and beneficiaries. And I think that goes back to a couple of principles. One, just the basic economic principle of purchasing power. We're going to be able to do a lot more to build a regional brand and an identity if we pool our funding together. This is pooling funding, and purchasing power is a standard practice for economic decisions throughout the whole nation, and not just based on marketing initiatives like these. And then there has been a little bit of a division in the community between different parts of Humboldt County and within the cannabis industry. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to heal some of those divisions and to find a way to move forward. I think that if we remain divided on this, and this conversation continues to be about who should get the funding, who deserves the funding, who's going to benefit from the funding the most, versus how can we work together, let's make this right, let's do an awesome job, and come at this from a perspective of a community, I don't think it will be successful. So we'll have to, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, it's going to take a careful balance to move this program forward. We've got a couple of more minutes here, and then I want to talk about the feedback and comment form and process. I'm going to go ahead and just go through the Q&A box one more time. I do see one here from Hannah. Let's see here. Okay, hello and good morning. I appreciate this format. I have a few questions. Quality standards is critical for maintaining the craft value and the name. How do we create and balance standards with the current opportunity of being able to use the Humboldt County name on any product produced 100% in the county? And then the second part to that is, in considering the long-term organizational structure that we need to house these marketing efforts in between government stakeholders, is there a business structure that would behold and best serve the interests of stakeholders? I'm specifically thinking about tax liability of promoting cannabis products, perhaps a nonprofit organization. There should not be a profit made off of an organization marketing Humboldt, in my opinion. Ross, would you like to take that one?
Sure. I think those are great questions. To the question about quality standards, I think Hannah is pointing to a little bit, and I think it's a really amazing opportunity. The fact that we now have an appellations program, which is going to be implemented starting just in a few months in January. And part of the appellations program is the opportunity to define standards, practices, and cultivars for use in each appellation, which is basically a way of setting minimum quality standards for cannabis. And so we talk about in the assessment, this really puts appellations and regions on the cutting edge of defining what quality is, which is something that we're still having, I think, an ongoing conversation about in the cannabis industry, which I think is a really exciting part of this marketing project in general. It wasn't an emphasis of this presentation, but in general, the question of quality and how do you promote and define quality is really central to all these regions. It's amazing that Humboldt County has this incredible global reputation. But what we saw was even with regions like Bordeaux, which have this incredible reputation, when their quality slips, it becomes a real problem for them. So both, I think, looking at appellations as a tool to really have a conversation about quality, and then thinking more broadly about the marketing program as a whole and what can it do as part of this conversation about grading standards, defining quality, promoting quality. All of that is a really important long-term project. And again, I think speaks to the importance of the industry and the stakeholders at the center of this, because those are the folks who are going to have the capacity to define and implement ideas around quality. To the question about the long-term organizational structure, I am not that knowledgeable about organizational structures. So I don't have like super specific thoughts, but I would tend to agree that probably a for-profit organization doesn't really seem appropriate. One, basic aspect of a geographical integrations approach is that it's really a collective, cooperative approach on behalf of a region as a whole, which is designed to return value to all the stakeholders. It's not being managed for private profit. And I mean, that's really the critical aspect of what this whole conceptual approach is. So I absolutely agree that a for-profit organization is probably not the appropriate place to house this.
Also, and Ross, I also want to ask you, and this was from another attendee, how do you see the chambers of commerce in Humboldt being involved in this process and being in this conversation?
So that's a type of question that we don't really go into in the assessment. Again, trying to stay out of the question of like, how specifically do we do that here, which I think is like a community conversation we're having, and more perspective of like, what lessons can we draw from other regions? So I would defer that to just folks to discuss and talk about.
Awesome, great. Well, we've run just a little long, but I think it's been good conversation. Unfortunately, there are more questions and in the Q&A feature and in the chat box than we're going to be able to get to. There have been a lot of questions concerning the award of funding that went to SHBVB. Laura has put her email address in the chat box. She's happy to talk through that matter and explain to any interested parties how that contract came to be. Also, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, either via phone or email if you want to have that conversation. But going back to this conversation, which is about the marketing assessment itself, there is a feedback process, and I posted in the box a link to the feedback form. I want to, let me see if I can share my screen. I'm also new to the webinar version of Zoom, and so it's been a little buggy for me. Let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, so this is my screen. Ross, can you see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So this is our online feedback form, and I really encourage you. I know that all of the participants and the stakeholders and the cultivators are very busy, but it's important that we hear from the community, and that we hear from the community in a format that we can document or save, so that we can take these conclusions and comments directly to the Board of Supervisors when we bring before the board a list of recommendations and scenarios for the marketing program. You can go online here to the Form Center, and you can comment specifically by section. The way that this form has been established is that there are comment boxes or fields for the different sections of the assessment. But if you don't have time for that, or you're not interested in commenting on each section, you can simply scroll down and put your recommendations or your comments into these near the end of the document. Once you comment, you can put in your email address if you want to receive a copy of the form, and then you click submit here at the bottom of the page. This form is on the county's website. The URL is really long, so I'm not going to read it, but I did post it in the chat box. And if you're looking for the URL later, you can email my team at gohumco@co.humboldt.ca.us, and we can send it over to you. Or if you're not interested in filling out this form, you can just simply send us an email, put your comments in an email. You can send us an anonymous letter. Whatever works best for you. Call and leave your comments in a voice message. But we're going to be taking the comments, and we're going to be looking for recurring themes and recurring feedback and consistencies to use that to inform our staff report when we take a set of recommendations back to the Board of Supervisors. Also, I do want to mention, as you look through this form, it's comprehensive. There are 13 boxes. You don't have to write in or put in full paragraphs. You can make these comments very simplistic. We want it to be easy
for you, but we also want to stress the importance of having written or documented feedback that we can take before the Board of Supervisors when we present those recommendations. So a little bit of housekeeping at the end here. If you want a copy of the presentation today, you can email us and we can send that over to you. We are recording today's town hall. If we can't figure out a way to send it out as a shareable link, I've already received communication from staff during this meeting that we might be able to upload it to YouTube. And once we do that, we can make those links available at the Project Trellis page at the GoHumco website, and we can also share it with the public in general and push it out to the community. If you have any other questions specifically about the assessment, you can also reach out to Ross, or you can reach out to myself directly or to HCGA. Again, the comment period has been extended to the 16th. But I know that this is the worst time of year for cultivators to be able to take time to devote to something other than the operations of their business. So we'll do our best to try to collect as much feedback as we can by the 16th. If we need to extend it for a little bit longer period of time, we can do that. But really, eventually, because timing is of the essence here, and there are a lot of other communities who are working together to try to beat Humboldt to the market and to gain market share. We want to ensure that we do move quickly. That said, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining today. And Ross, thank you as well. Also, Nadeline, who joined us as a panelist, although Nadeline, I don't think we had you contribute at all. So I apologize if there's anything.
No worries. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Ross covered this extremely well on our behalf. So thank you, everyone.
Great. And I also just want to say, Ross has put a tremendous amount of work into this document and into putting together the assessment and the recommendations. And so, Ross, thank you very much for doing this. This document and just these conversations. This is a huge boon for our community and for the cannabis industry. So thank you. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you so much.